Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today I'm hoping this is going to be the start of something that a lot of you have been asking me to do for quite a while, and that is update the graphics card test system. Now, when it does come to updating the system, there is a to and fro that you can have an argument about, in that if you always have the leading edge performance in the system, then the people at home, yes, they have something to aspire to, but they also don't necessarily have an idea what the performance that they might get if they are not running the absolute bleeding edge of equipment. So we have tested today with a 13900 KS, but what happens if someone does just want to know with a 12400? And sometimes having that little step behind gives you a decent option of knowing what's going on, but also you can see, as we've been experiencing recently, that you do get bottlenecks quite easily. So the 4090 pretty much bottlenecked our 3950X at 4K in a lot of games, let alone 1440. So it's now time. The green team have got performance up so high now, we have had to move forward. But because we've had to move forward, it also means that we have to move backwards. Now, reviewers get a lot of flack for the fact that we have hardware laying around for a long time, and people, quite rightly, might see the fact that there's a 2080 Ti in here while they're playing with a, let's say, a 1650 Ti, and think, well, I could use that. And that is absolutely right. Do you know what I mean? At the end of the day, we are very privileged to have this much hardware, and I understand the kind of green eyes aspect, but the fact that I do still have a 1060 that I haven't given away to be able to pull out of its box, which I still have because I am very proud of my box collection, because they are everywhere, is that it means I can retest. And like I said, step back in time with new drivers and new equipment, and be able to give you guys the data. So it's not a bragging, or showing off. It's not arrogance. It's just the reason why we keep this stuff is it allows us to do our jobs and hopefully entertain and even educate you guys at home. So as I've said, we have started at the 1060 and worked our way through without hitting the supers. So we've got like the 1060, 70, 80, 80 Ti, 2060, 70, 80, 80 Ti, 3060, 70, 80, 80 Ti, and then we move on to the 4070 Ti and the 4080. I missed out the 4090 because at the end of the day it's just up there, and I wanted to do these ones first to see, quite crazily, how the games and stuff would sit. Now, I have done other games as well, but we're just kind of trying to shorten it down for this video and this review, and we are doing other graphics cards as well from the other team, and you will see those later as well, because we do have a full set of brand new results and everything, but I just needed to kind of break them down, because this video would be an absolute mile long, as you'll see when I try to talk to you about F1 2022 in a minute as well. Now, when it cut, we're going to start with the start, because we're not going to start with the end, or we could do, but anyway, Cuda cores. Now, I actually thought that Cuda cores would have just got progressively higher and higher and higher as the newer they got, because obviously they'd been shrinking down the node and the architecture so that we can squeeze more in. But in reality, it was the 3080 Ti that came in with the most amount of Cuda cores. Now, when I say that though, you do need to remember that now we have the ray tracing cores and the tensor cores for AI also to consider with, so that might kind of explain partially why the 4080 and the 4070 Ti have slightly less Cuda cores. But time will tell whether shrinking the node that little bit more may mean that they expand those more. Which way will they go? Will they give us more ray tracing cores? Will they give us more AI? Will they give us more CUDA? Who knows? But the balance at the moment, as you'll see in a bit, is obviously fairly, is working, basically, was what I wanted to say. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say was even CPU processor clock speeds have gone up throughout the years, and the graphics card clock speeds also have as well. As you can see with you've got the 4080s right at the end, but weirdly when you look at it, the 1080 Ti had the lowest clock speed out of all of these, and it wasn't necessarily the 1060. So the 1060 did have that little bit more higher clock speed back in the day. And sometimes you do experience that the more cores and everything you've got, that obviously the more power it's going to use, but also it's more difficult for the yield when they make it to get them to run that high with all of those cores. So sometimes you get more cores, but things slow down that little bit, and that is also reflected in CPUs. Thermals, these were just run at auto. Didn't change a thing. This is how it came out of the pack. Now, the early NVIDIAs always did have about an 80-85 degree threshold anyway, and then what would happen is when it hit the 85 degrees, the fan speed would start to increase. If things got too hot, as they all will still do, they will start to downclock as well. So it's not like you can put them in a box and they're going to perform exactly the same. Once things start to get that little bit too warm for them to be able to cope with, they will still downclock that little bit to keep within that threshold. But because of the case we used, which I will say is the Corsair, and we've got 3 fans in the front. We have a H170 in the roof, because I've had to slightly tweak the back of the roof to be able to get in. So there's 340mm fans in the roof. There's also an RMI 1000 that we've used to power it with the cable mod 12V8 PWR adapter, and that's all hanging off of an MSI Carbon, which, as I've also said, is home for the 13900KS. Now, we've got 6000 megahertz of memory in there, and it's set with XMP. The processor is literally on auto. We've left that alone. We've not done anything with it, and we had a balanced cooler profile for the airflow, which was also mimicked within the case. So we've not done anything out of the ordinary. There's no overclocking. It's pretty much click it together, build at home, hit XMP, because you always should, because that's free performance. Your memory will not be running unless you've clicked that. Well, it will be running, but it won't be running at rated. And that is where the thermals lie. And as you can see, it's actually a mixed bag when you scan through them, because the 1060 didn't really get hot, but there wasn't a great deal going on. And I will say with the 1060 is it's a lot smaller under the hood than it looks. And the other one that I wish we'd had more of was the 2060, because it was actually a tidy little card, couple of little fans on the front, open framed, but the cooler wrapped around. But the one thing that, and the reason why this card stands out for me out of all of them during the testing, was the fact that they put the power, which was a single 8-pin, on the end. Now, I know with the 4000 series, as that stands now, we've obviously had people moaning about 4080 and 4090s not being able to get in the system. And if the power was round here, you've still got the loop that everyone talks about. But for that card in the system, it was just beautiful, and I wish we would see more of it. I'm still not particularly a fan of where that power card connector goes, but people do like to see the cable on the side. I obviously don't like the standard adapter because I think it's ugly, and I think they could have done a better job. But when you get an aftermarket cable like the ones from Cable Mod, that could, and quite often is, a really nice addition and a decent feature to your system. Deep breaths. We're going to go off topic quite a bit, I feel. Power draw, as I've said, it's not necessarily where you would expect it, but with the 3080 Ti pulling over 500 watts, and I do need to stress that 500 watts isn't the graphics card on its own, that is the entire system power draw. It's basically the power that is coming out of the power supply, not from the wall. So you're going to get a small amount on top. if you were counting from the wall itself. If you were counting from the wall itself with this power supply, that would have been about 520 watts there. Deep breaths, maybe 530, I can't remember. Now, when we come into the games, we have done 2 resolutions. So we have done 1440 and then 4K. We have also done what we would call an ultra setting. So if there's an ultra preset without ray tracing, we have used that. Then we have also done an ultra preset with ray tracing if it's available. And if we've used that setting, we've also enabled at the same time DLSS and frame generation if it's available. So effectively, you're going to get an ultra test, and then you're going to get an ultra ray tracing test with anything DLS3 or DLSS that we can turn on as well. So that's just so that you can see. Now with 4K, it's obviously quite a stressful game. Cyberpunk has had a lot of updates quite recently to add in even more complexity. And with 1440, you can see that you can get some decent frames per second with the older cards still. From the sort of like 2060, that's still decently playable at 1440p with it in the normal setting, but it doesn't quite go over the 60 frames per second mark until you get to really the 2080. But 4K is the crippler. As you can see with 4K, it's even missing down with the 10 series because we've got the resolution going on there, but you really do need the DLSS and the frame gen to really kind of make it pick up. But again, with Cyberpunk, you don't really see over 60 frames per second, even with DLSS, until you get to the 3080. Now, F1 2021, this was the one, as well as Cyberpunk, but with F1 2021, I was determined to have this little snip where we went from the 1060 right the way through to the other cards and giving you like 10 or 15 seconds of performance throughout a single benchmark. But oh my days, it turned into a complete and utter nightmare because at the end of the day, all of these 10 and 15 seconds really, really add up. And it was just going to get out of hand. So as you've seen a few pop up that you can have a look at. But we're going to stick to most of the visuals today being about the 4080. So with the 4080 running, now I'm going to show you the 1440p result, but the result that's on the screen itself is the 4K one. And it runs actually quite well. But when you really turn on all the bells and whistles, it does become a bit of a resource hog, and it wasn't something that I was particularly prepared for, especially some of the very low frames per second that you get down at the other end. But asking a 2060 to play at 4K in any game is too much of an ask, which is exactly why we made sure that we did all the 1440p results as well. But at 4K, even with just the rasterized performance, with it all turned up to within an inch of its life, you can see that even the 4080 is still in the 50s. So it did take for us to add on the DLSS and the frame generation to really see that performance leap. And in reality, it is an awfully, awfully big leap. Flight Simulator is something that we have run on the website in the past, but Microsoft, in their wisdom, do keep rolling out performance updates. Now, we did do 2 separate sets of complete like retests, but it got to a point that we were chasing our tails so much with Microsoft that every time there was an update that came out, it almost rendered all of the old performance kind of just useless, basically. And it meant that we were on this constant loop of trying to bring you fresh results so that things were comparable. So we ended up dropping it from the test suite just because it was a pain in the bum. But is incredibly taxing. So even with the 1440p result, as you can see here, you can get some decent frames per second at rasterized from about the 3060, which is, you know, fairly healthy. But obviously you've got that DLSS edge, which means almost with the 2060 means at 1440p it's over that 60 frames per second mark. But at 4K it's a totally different kettle of fish, which is why you can see that there are even bars missing where it just was at like non-existent frames per second, like 2 or 3 up and down all over the place. So there was no like happy average for us to talk about, which is why the bars are missing. But again, what you can see at the end of the graph is like the big leaps with DLSS. But the 3080 Ti in reality, and like the 3080, you can see that you are getting a healthy 40 frames per second bump up there. Now, you do need to remember that when we're telling you all of this info, it does just let you know whether you are going to go and look at the results that you have with your system now. Is your CPU going to be letting you down? Are you thinking about going and buying a second-hand card? Go careful you don't get an X-mining one. But it does give you an idea where the performance can be. And let's face facts, we like to absorb this kind of stuff, pick them apart, see where our system sits. Should we upgrade? Do we need a 13600? Do we need a 4070 or a 4080 as an upgrade? Hopefully this will help you work it out. But one of the things I do want to say, as we start to talk about Overwatch, we'll start with 1440p. I do want to put out a public apology. With Overwatch and Valorant, if you have been playing it recently and you saw someone called Tiny Tom Logan on your team and they did very badly, yeah, that was me. And that's why there is no footage of it. And that's because I am very bad at that sort of game. I really like playing car games and wheeled games and maybe things where you have to build stuff, not Minecraft. But it's not the type of game that I'm very good at or have patience with. It's not something I enjoy after a day sat playing games. So if you did see me and you lost a round because of it, then I'm very sorry. But we needed to do it for science, as Leonard would say from The Big Bang Theory. Anyway, frames per second with these, we're actually quite mad throughout. It's 1440p, it's not a particularly stressful game to run, and neither is it in reality at 4K. And it is one of those kind of games that you do need to remember, or this makes me remember why people want high frames per second, and it does get very you know, the competition behind this, I completely understand it. But the one thing I will say with this is we did leave the, there's a resolution scaler, and in my own error, because I've never played or used this game before, I did leave it on. Now what I did do is I went back to the 10s and turned it off and moved up, and thankfully, for my own sanity, the way that the graph increases was the same, but the frames per second was obviously lower. So this is with the scaler turned on, but the graph did go up in a similar sort of way. So I did the 10s and then I stopped because I didn't want to have to go through every single card again. So you have the 1440 and the 4K, but please remember, like with the 4080, it was at 456, but you were looking at the high 200s without the scaler on, but it still did go up in the same sort of thing. It doesn't seem to have a target for you to go at. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's almost a bit like DLSS, but without them calling it, if that makes for, you know, the way that my head is working, is obviously DLSS almost turns the 4K back to 1440 and then sort of scales it up, and maybe it's a similar sort of thing. Valorant, again, I'm very sorry if you've been playing Valorant recently and you kept seeing this person jumping in called Tiny Tom Logan and losing you matches. That was me. Again, I apologise. It's science. It's just something I had to do. But don't worry, I will not be playing it with you very often again, or maybe not ever again. We will have to see. But the 1440p and the 4K results, as you can see there, very much, it obviously isn't particularly stressful for you to be able to get your teeth into. It kind of feels like you could run it on a calculator, but if you did want to go out and invest in one of those crazy 360 hertz monitors, that is actually a game that will do over 360 hertz, so you can actually utilize it to its maximum potential. Witcher. Right, now Witcher is the reason why I had to specifically say to you guys at the beginning about Ultra and then Ultra ray tracing, because Witcher, oh my days, it's like the thing for games. It's the game at the moment to make your graphics card cry. Now it does seem to have this weird 60 frames per second glitch going on, as you'll see with some of the results. It will make you instantly think of VSync, but the fact it's over 60 frames per second means their average results. It means on average, some of them have been like much higher. So it's not VSync. It seems to be something within the game. Maybe a driver will fix it. Maybe a game update will roll out. But we got those results consistently. We went in and made sure VSync was turned off. We would literally turn in VSync off, coming out, going back into the game, double checking. And if you did turn VSync on, they all went down to about 59 point something. But with it off, it never really kind of went any higher. It's like there's a frame hold being turned on, but none of that was on anyway, as you can see with some of the other results. So it was a strange one. We've not really been able to get down to the bottom of it. And that only happened with the rasterized results when it was on Ultra. When we went on to Ultra ray tracing, dear oh dear. So you would think that if you're playing with your rasterized result, and then you go on to, yes, turning the ray tracing on, but also turning on DLSS and frame generation, even I would think the performance would go up. And it didn't. It actually went down. And that just goes to show you, when you turn the ultra ray tracing on in this game, it is monumentally stressful. To the point, I would say, that it's only really playable above 60 frames per second with all the bells and whistles turned on with the 4070 Ti and the 4080. It's literally, I cannot stress, Witcher 3 is probably the best graphics card test at the moment if you want to look at ray tracing specifically, because turning ray tracing on just cripples everything else. It's an absolute hog. Now, I do think they're going to probably tweak and play around with it, which is going to ruin all my results again. But as you can see in the graphs, it is incredibly, incredibly stressful. Blender, the simple Blender benchmark that you can run at home, gives you a couple of results. Monster, Junk Shop and Classroom. We've gone right the way through with all of these just so that you can see how yours may perform at home. It's free to download, it's easy to run. When you get to the thing where it says to select what you want it to run on, you'll get the choice of your CPU or your graphics card. We always click the graphics card. These are the results that came out. But something that we've done new for this test, it's the first time we've ever done it. Clearly not a big deal for everybody else, but it's new for us, and that's we've started using Premiere Pro. Now, we've used the Puget bench within Premiere Pro. The Puget bench data is free to download online. It comes up as a project that you can use within Premiere Pro. So again, if you use Premiere Pro, you can download this stuff and compare it at home for free. That is the critical thing. It's not going to cost you anything. You're not going to have to go and buy 3D Mark or anything like that. You can see how yours will perform from there. And we've again gone from the 1060 starting with 900 points all the way up to the 4080 with 1641 points. The only thing that I will say is something that I noticed with Premiere Pro is if I'd been testing games beforehand and then tested Premiere Pro, I was getting about a 200 to 300 points drop. So what I was noticing that I was having to do was finish my games testing, restart the system, go in and then start from afresh. Never ever worked out why, but it was fairly consistent. And it just got to the point where I knew that I had to restart. So that is a good tip for you guys at home. If you're going to start using Premiere, restart, do it from afresh. Not sure what it was. I'd already forced close, so by going down to the bottom corner and like exiting things like Steam and everything, so there was only the core system stuff running. But it just seemed to, I don't know, maybe the graphics cards go into like a game mode and they don't switch over into a professional mode very easily. I'm not sure, but that would be my advice for you guys at home. And it's now literally ingrained in my head because I had to go back in and retest so many times, and it's not a 5-minute test. So there you go. Very lengthy video, but we are at the end. We've done an awful lot of back testing of the green cards. I know there's going to be several of you at home shouting at the screen because the red ones haven't been done yet, but they are coming as well, so don't worry. We are also, I've only shown you a few, but there's going to be a lot more tests that get spawned out as well when the graphics card test system finally goes live and we're testing brand new graphics cards on it. I do have a couple of older graphics cards. I do have a couple of graphics cards in for review that are still going to go through the old rig, but we will eventually be doing the big switch over to this, maybe when other things change as well, because we do have other test rigs that are coming. We've already completely retested all of or a lot of CPUs, back tested those with a 4090. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't been able to test it with this, because we've been testing CPUs and it's been crazy. But we're moving our CPU testing onto a 4090 as well, and we've also got a new test rig in the works, not quite started on the testing yet, for CPU coolers as well. That's got complicated because it's not just one anymore. So lots of back testing coming. I have been slow in catching up, but I am definitely on the treadmill now, running as fast as I can. Although on a treadmill I wouldn't be getting anywhere. You get where I'm trying. My head failed me right at the last minute. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this step back in time. Newest drivers, they were all tested on the same one. I'll pop the number up on the screen because I can't remember it off the top of my head. But we tested all with the same driver right the way through, and they were the numbers that we got. So please, let me know if you enjoyed this. Should I be doing more of it, or should I just be quiet and just crack on with doing the review side of it rather than the back testing side of it? I would love to hear back from you. Please, if you managed to get to the end and you didn't skip, then you, sir, or you, madam, or you, whatever your pronoun might be, because I don't want to start getting in trouble for that, you are a legend. Give yourself a pat on the back, and this is the moment that we would normally say that you get an internet cookie and you would go into the comments and just write cookie, or I really earned my cookie, or I don't like cookies, or something like that. It just means that I can see that you've watched to the end, and then I will make sure that I reply to you as well. But please like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, share with your nan, share with your dog. I don't care. But thank you very much. This has been the tiniest one with an absolute mission of a retest out. Ding! Love you, sis.